Hello, we are very happy to have you here. We're going to have a session about the global forum that we're organizing in Paris, but as we have a very special guest coming from Brussels only for our event here, I'm going to give her the floor, so because unfortunately she has to leave for other events after that, and she wanted to be there. So this is without further ado, as you say, I pass the floor to Christina from the European Commission, DG Energy.
Well, Christina, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. This whole side event is a side event where we're looking at policy progress in regions around the world, and we're asking the question what the private sector is actually doing in that respect. And when we designed the session, we of course wanted to have a conversation with the European Union, with a senior policymaker from the European Union, and we added a little bit of a question mark to the title. Can Europe claim leadership in policies to decarbonize the building sector? I don't know whether we come to a judgment tonight, but I would like us to discuss what the EU has done, because the EU put the Green Deal at the center of its policy making about 4 years ago. And it has since then followed up with a number of pieces of legislation. For example, the EU has increased its greenhouse gas reduction target to 55% by 2030. That's a very ambitious target. And we know that buildings in Europe cause more than 1/3 of the CO2 emissions. Can you describe us what the EU really does to tackle these large pieces of emissions?
Yes, Oliver, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I think that the COP, one of the most important things I would do in the COP is side event, because we had the opportunity to discuss, and I think this is my 10th event today, so I think it's very good and very rich for all of us. So thank you for inviting me, and indeed, I think that the COP is the best place to talk about those topics. Allow me to start by something that happened the 2nd of December. We were here, my team accompanied the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who launched together with the COP presidency, the Emirates COP presidency, these global targets on tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency. And so I think this is somehow the translation to the entire world on what we consider that are the core policies for decarbonization in the European Union. As you all know, the Paris Agreement does not introduce any technology, so climate neutrality, but means technology neutral as well. But we consider in the European Union that energy efficiency and renewables, the two core policies, are the best or the most cost-efficient way to achieve decarbonization. What we have done, Oliver, you have explained very well. We had this very ambitious target, -55, and this ambitious target was translated into the Fit for 55 package that you all know, more than 13 proposals. And when it comes to the sector that you represent here, the building sector, you know that decarbonizing building sector is one of the cornerstones of decarbonization because of the emission they represent. And you know that in this Fit for 55 package, there are 3 legislative proposals that, let's say, concern buildings. There are 2, the revision of our renewable directive, also the energy efficiency directive that settles somehow the general framework, and then the PVD, that is the 2 first one has been already agreed by the co-legislator. And the PVD, the energy performance in building, is still in the making. So hopefully the 7th is Thursday. Yes, because I had a meeting with our commissioner. She leaves tomorrow, and she will land in Brussels and will go almost directly to the Parliament to have the trilogue on the PVD. And we hope that this will be the last one. So hopefully we'll have an agreement before the end of the year, as was the willingness expressed by the co-legislator. So this is what I can say at this stage. Thank you.
You mentioned the Energy Efficiency Directive. Can you say what it does for buildings? Is there something specifically in it which covers the building sector?
Yes, indeed, you know that Energy Efficiency Directive has introduced a new target. It is even higher than the one that we have for the 2030 framework. So this binding target, as you all know, we need to reduce the final energy consumption by 11.7% by 2030. When it comes to how we can achieve this target, because it's very high, very ambitious, we have tried to introduce something new, is that we want the public sector to lead by the example and to start the work on that. So a new annual energy consumption reduction target for the public sector has been introduced, that is 1.9%, and this is completely new. We didn't have before. And there are also their obligations related also to buildings in particular. So this 3%, you know very well that the obligation to renew at least 3% of the public buildings, and also there is also another important element, is that and it's very much linked to the renewables. We cannot talk about energy efficiency without talking about renewables, and this is not so evident, because we have seen when negotiating with other countries the global pledge, that is the two core policies together. Some countries say, okay, I can join renewables, but I cannot join energy efficiency. No, 1 second, because we think that all the two have to be together. And the example is, for example, the heating and cooling in buildings. So, I mean, if you really want to decarbonize the building sector, you need also to act on the renewable side. And we need to, now 70% of heating and cooling is fed by fossil fuels, so we need to go for cleaner energies. So these are some of the elements of the EED.
And I think this is, the renewable part is exactly where the Renewable Energy Directive comes into the game. Because if I understand correctly, there is really also a requirement to increase renewable heating in buildings, in existing buildings also?
Yes, exactly. There is, we have acted on the two, we have the two directives, so one on the energy efficiency and one on renewables. The one on renewables introduces new targets, overall targets, but also targets related to biomass, fuels not on non-biological origin. So we have some element as well related to the production of hydrogen. So the renewable directive is somehow the framework, how to, and then when it comes to the specific energy efficiency directive, we have introduced some obligation to have to increase the share of renewables in different sectors of the economy in the European Union. Once we have the EPBD concluded from the Commission, we'll be able just to have for the whole European Union the new framework for the next year until 2030. And then obviously next year will be a year of changes in the European Union. We'll have a new parliament. We'll have a new commission. We don't know if we'll have the same president or another one, but there will be a new commission. And you know that when a new commission comes, there is also a new working plan, and so probably new ways to achieve the targets.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, the legislation is reducing demand in buildings through the Energy Efficiency Directive. It's increasing renewable supply in heating and cooling in buildings through the Renewable Energy Directive. Then what remains for the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which you said is just in the final stages of being negotiated? What remains for this directive to really regulate, to do?
Yes, well, the EPBD, still negotiations ongoing. I know that some points, I cannot reveal that first because I don't participate in the trilogue, and also because still, but the minimum energy performance standards in buildings is still under negotiations, and also how we can also somehow increase or improve as I was saying before, the heating and cooling in buildings. So this is also something when we negotiate between the Parliament and the Council. The most difficult point is always how to. One co-legislator normally wants a higher figure, and another co-legislator wants a less higher figure. So these are now the two. The content of the trilogue for the next 7th of December. And what we believe, again, is that, and this is something that is new compared to the current 2030 framework, is I think that we have done more interlinks into, with the two pieces of legislation, the three, because energy efficiency we had to refer to buildings as well. What is clear is that, and this is something that in the Commission we prepared the impact assessment for the Fit for 55 and the PPD and the EED. It was considered that this major interaction with the Renewable Directive, and also something that is very important and we didn't have for the 2030 framework, is financing. This is something very important. I know from the Commission that it's never enough, we know. But for this 2030 framework, we had 3 years of the Next Generation Fund, more than 100 billion that will be dedicated to, and 35% of this budget will be dedicated to, as you know, energy transition. We have now in the very final steps for Member States to present amended recovery and resilient plans, also in the light of the REPowerEU. And a very significant part, I think, we need to check because not all the country has submitted their plans, but around 35% or even 40%, they have presented actions dedicated to energy efficiency, and 60% dedicated to energy efficiency in buildings.
Okay, that concerns probably mostly renovation activities.
Yes.
Yeah. Does the EPBD also define a new standard for new buildings which will be constructed in the future?
Yes, we have these minimum standards, but under negotiation.
Yes, so of course, I understand, but the idea is to also strengthen the standards for new buildings.
Yes, exactly. For new buildings, will have to be, because the target is that beyond 2030, we'll go for net zero buildings as well.
Net zero emission buildings.
Yeah, and but the legislation is not yet there, so but this will be the objective. So beyond 2030, we'll have to achieve.
Yeah, but the pathway is clear.
So this directive, this revision of the directive, is another step forward. And
excellent. Yeah. I know you have to leave in a minute. Can I ask you one quick final question? This all sounds very ambitious and leading and responding really to the commitment in the Paris Agreement, so that's very, very positive. But I can also imagine it's not necessarily easy for the member states to implement it, because it has to be implemented, it has to be transposed into national legislation in the member states. What does the European Commission or the European Union in general do to support that implementation and to make it really happen?
Well, the easiest answer will be that there is a legal obligation, obviously, but I don't want to be so bureaucratic. And I think, and this is a lesson that we have learned from the energy crisis. And I have been working in the Commission for 20 years, 10 years in the energy sector. I have never worked so intensively with member states, national administration, local, regional, and with the stakeholders, industry, citizens, associations. So I think that this is the pathway that we have to improve in the future. You know that we understand that we have the governance for that, we have the institution, we have the Committee of the Region, we have the Economic and Social Committee, and we need to work more with member states in particular to communicate to cities, to the citizen in Europe, that, because sometimes the perception we have is that, and this is legitimate, that citizens consider that from Europe we settle a very ambitious target, and it's not affordable. So this is the first point that we need to convey. And the only way to do so is to improve cooperation and to improve communication as well. And obviously, for the first time as well, for this 2030 framework, we have created the Just and Social Transition Fund. It's not obviously for buildings, but it's for regions who will have more difficulties to achieve the energy transition in the European Union. So probably in the future, we'll need to increase this kind of funds for the region that will have more difficulties to adapt buildings to the objective
Okay.
decarbonization.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us tonight in your very busy schedule today. We'll leave it to the audience to decide whether Europe is a leader in that field. We don't want to make this judgment on stage here, but thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, finally introducing, happy to have you here. We have quite interesting panels tonight. So, I'm Emmanuel de Lanversin, as you can see. It's okay. He's a very nice guy, so I'm very, very flattered to be him. And so we. Main thing, I think, main message we have to deliver is that we are collectively organizing this global forum in March 2024 in Paris. And we are launching the Buildings Breakthrough tomorrow. So, beginning of the presentation, tomorrow 12:30 in Al-Waha Theatre, come with friends. And Global Forum for Buildings and Climate in March 2024 in Paris, if there's only 2 dates to remember. These are our favorites at the moment. This forum is meant to gather for the very first time all the ministers, at a global level, ministers in charge of construction. We issued about, I think, 80 invitations, or more or less. If we are lucky, we'll have more. If we're not lucky, we'll have less. But it's okay. The important thing is that there is a place, that we create this forum, this place for people to meet, people to be together, and ministers in charge of construction who usually don't travel that much. To be in Paris together, discussing on how they can collectively get to the path of a decarbonized and resilient building sector. To that effect, we also want to gather all the stakeholders of the value chain of the building sector, which actually some of you know, I think, doesn't exist really as a sector. We see it as an emitting sector, let's say, but as such, it's not structured like an industry. It's a very specific industry. Each country has its own ways and habits, and it's a good thing. There's no way you can change, you can have a universal way of seeing things, but everybody has to make progress at this regard. So one of the things we want to do also is to be able to gather not only ministers but also all the value chain. We are organizing, so on the 7th of March, different sessions, about 20 sessions, again if we're lucky, about 20 sessions that will be set up by partners. We don't want to be the one doing the work here. We want the others to work. And the outcomes of these sessions are three things. First, demonstrate that solutions exist, showcase solutions, reproducible solutions. Second, commitments. We want stakeholders to really draft commitments. And third, messages. What messages do the stakeholders have to send to other stakeholders? The worst case would be that this ends like a letter to Le Père Noël, to the governments. This is not what we're aiming. We don't want stakeholders who say, oh, we want governments to do this, we want governments to do that. Even if we are ready to take some of the burden, and we are drafting a common declaration of governments, and we will be negotiating this until March. So hopefully we will have a common declaration of ministers. But, well, I think I've said enough. Jonathan, do you want to?
You said it all.
Okay, good.
No, just, I mean, many familiar faces in the room. I mean, we've been working on this topic, I think, for a number of years now with the Global Alliance, and there's been a whole way to get to this moment that now will become a reality in March. We've been talking for a long time that we really want to bring the ministers of construction together. I think we are always talking a little bit here in the COPs, in the climate bubble. Everybody already talks about climate, we all know about it, and we are not talking to the ones that we still need to really convince and the ones that we really want to actually tackle also these issues. They have, of course, a number of other issues that they are looking at tackling when you talk about ministries of housing construction, because they are more thinking about, okay, how many people don't have houses today, and how many buildings do I need to build? How can I do it fast, and how can I deliver it? But how can we bring them to think about those things and at the same time think about the climate action that is required in the sector? And I think that's where we want to get. And talking about, you know, I think the different actors that we want to bring also together here, I think there are a lot of actors that have already made commitments, that are setting targets, and, you know, already taking actions. And I think that's also what we want to tell the ministers of construction, in the sense that, yes, the community is here, they are engaged, they are committed. Of course, we need to bring all the ones that have not yet made the commitments with us, but, you know, there are already a number of very strong actors here and a number of very strong organizations that are really pushing the agenda and already, you know, I mean, if I look at the banking sector, there are a number of banks that today they are already all setting targets about net zero banking. But now they also need, you know, to work together also with all the parties and all the governments also to actually, work hand in hand. And I think that's what we're looking for in the end, that, you know, we manage to work hand in hand and show that we all have the same vision, we're all sharing it, and we want to see it implemented. So, yeah, and for the forum, definitely hoping, of course, to get governments, but also, like I mentioned, get all these strong players that are already there and that can actually give the confidence also, I think, to the governments that we're here with you and we want to succeed this transformation with you. So,
yeah, thank you. So I think the best way to show that we want to collaborate with you in the room is to leave you the floor here and to have GBPN, BPIE, OECD, I mean, I see many of our major supporters, players, and participating, so we are happy to have you all here, and we are happy to leave you the floor to showcase what you can bring to this forum and what you can bring to us. So we are going and leaving you the floor here. So I'm happy to call. In the meantime, I'm the as Emmanuel, in the meantime, myself and Emmanuel, I have to coordinate these two hands here. So, as MC, I'm happy to call OECD, Lamia Kamal-Shawi, and Tadashi Matsumoto. We've been working, and we are working with them to prepare this forum. You can choose exactly the place you want to be, and if you want to sit, you can stand, you can sit. I mean, it's perfectly all right. And Oliver, so do I stay? Do I go? What do I do?
I will assist you.
You see, we really need BPIE.
So really need
people
getting the
here.
right
Yes.
presentation.
Okay, I'll stay. I'm happy. I don't see
Good.
Lamia Kamal-Shawi that often, so I'm happy to be here.
You just click here,
Okay.
and you will have the screen here. Thank you.
So I'm supposed to be the first?
Yeah.
Okay, and does it work? Yes. Yes. So, it's the end of the day, but as usually, Yves Laurent, you set the tone. So before starting my speech, I want also to make a joke, because you made a lot of jokes. And the first one is, because of the air conditioning, I am completely sick, and many people are completely sick. So I have a great proposal. It's allergy. I have a great proposal for your ministerial meeting. Yeah. Is to, to have regulation. No AC below 22 degrees. What do you think about that?
I think we're agreeing.
No, so yes, to start with, of course, I'm really delighted to participate in this very important event that you, as a representative of the French government, but also BPIE and Global ABC, you have picked up on a very important subject, a subject that we all know, but maybe not enough addressed today, how to accelerate the net zero transition in the building sectors, which account for 40% of global energy-related greenhouse gas emission. And we know that a large part of that carbon footprint is generated even before people set their foot in their property. Construction. You mentioned that to me last time. Very energy intensive. According to the IEA, buildings account for 5% to 10% of energy consumption in advanced economies overall, on average, and up to 30% in developing countries. It's also very land intensive. Another striking data. Over the last 5 years, human construction has absorbed an area the size of Switzerland, reducing, of course, biodiversity and the natural space to absorb carbon. Well, there has been a lot of focus on building decarbonization and, of course, other important sectors such as transport in the net zero carbon debate. But now we need really to acknowledge that not enough attention has been paid to construction. So again, congratulations and thanks for your leadership. Thanks to France. I am also French, so I'm very happy. So yeah. Well, I know that France has been a leader in this area with buildings regulations that take a life cycle approach, limiting the carbon emissions of buildings in both their construction and use phase, which is important. And at the OECD, we are really proud now to supporting you as you are preparing with your colleague this global forum on buildings and climate next spring. I just asked him, did you mobilize your Japanese minister? He said yes. He did. So we are doing our home job. And again, it's going to be the first time, we will have ministers in charge of construction together. So it's really groundbreaking in terms of, global initiative. For us, this cooperation that we're having with you for this program is part of one program that we have at the OECD, among many others, a program that is dedicated to decarbonizing buildings. We have been working with policymakers at all levels of governments to advance this very critical agenda, focusing in the first phase on energy efficiency and decarbonizing the existing building stock, which of course remain a major challenge. Again, some data, the OECD produced data, that's something that we know. In the EU, a quarter of buildings were built before 1945 and are 5 times less energy efficient than those built after 2010. Many governments, Germany, Italy, have introduced subsidies to accelerate improvement, but much more needs to be done. And again, this is the role of all levels of government, not just national, but also cities and regions, who are actually responsible for building and zoning regulation, and they are driving up standards. We have a survey, we conducted a survey in 2021, and we found that 88% of cities and regions demand higher energy efficiency standard than their national level, and a quarter even call for net zero emissions, so they are really leading by example, and we have been collected a lot of information on that. We also produce a report. I'm doing some publicity as well. A policy checklist to help both national and local government. And we are also, providing targeted support to country. So I'm not going to continue because what I want now to do is to pass the floor to Tadashi. He's going to present you the very, very first findings from this global survey that we are doing for you in preparation of this important meeting. We had already a lot of response from many countries, but we will continue. So this is not the final version, of course. We are extending, the number of countries. But this can give you a little bit of flavor, where we are on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. So my name is Tadashi. So I continue the presentation. So we are presenting 6 preliminary findings here. Just as a background, this is based on 22 countries initially already provided answers to our question. And the number of these countries will increase, because we are still receiving some more countries. But this is, in this sense, it's a preliminary study result. So the first findings here, most countries will prioritize existing buildings in the future. This is a very important message, as you see. Our survey says at the beginning, it's a current situation. So our question is about the policy priorities of the current state and then future states. So in current, as you see, the new buildings are still in the priority, but in the future stages, the countries are focusing on existing buildings. And then you see the country, some differences at the regional level. Second findings here, most countries will prioritize circularity and embodied carbon in the future. As you see, currently actually the priority is operational energy consumption such as heating, cooling, and so on, which covers actually 88%. Only 12% goes to that circularity and embodied carbon, but it will increase to 44%. What is interesting here is that heating proportion is decreasing, but cooling continues to be an important challenge in the future, reflecting, of course, the climate change. The third findings. So this is based on a question about the regulations in this one. Our survey findings is that on regulations, countries are taking what we call step-by-step approach, meaning that we are starting. Countries are starting from installation regulations in the building code and energy efficiency, progressing towards primary energy consumption limit and life cycle CO2. So there are different steps by countries. Again, so far, we only received 22, and I would just say that many are from advanced economies. However, we are using this global ABC network, so we are receiving more diverse countries are coming up as responders. So the number may change, but the important part is that most of them, answered country has building code regulations, strict regulations, but foreseeing also life cycle approach as a step-by-step approach. And then the next slide shows similar question: how are you addressing on the life cycle, whole life cycle carbon approach? And then again, we are seeing this step-by-step approach. The first thing we see is the creation of national database for environmental product declarations, or EPDs, and then moving towards, I skipped the assessment methodologies first, and then go to the national database of EPD, and then go to the mandatory declaration, and then finally most advanced country groups. I guess France is part of this part, is already thinking or introducing this limiting value on CO2 emissions. So again, this journey is varying across countries, and not necessarily all the countries are taking the same steps. But it's important that if you are, for example, in assessment methodology part, very important what is coming ahead, how to prepare the next step and so on. So this is very important for us to understand.
For the Asia-Pacific region. She has trained as an architect and brings more than 2 decades of experience in driving sustainability in the built environment. And she's also a member of the Committee of the Bureau of Indian Standards for revision and updating of the National Building Code in India. So please welcome the panellists. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start with and ask some questions to, and it has one of the largest energy demand growth in the world. The building sector accounts for 38% of China's annual greenhouse gas emissions and is recognised by the Chinese government as key to achieving China's N+1 peaking strategy, which I hope Professor Zhang will explain a little bit about. The building sector targets actually are also recognised in the NDC, which is an interesting international commitment to building sector reform. So your peaking strategy includes some clear targets: improving residential energy efficiency by 85% in all but severe cold climates, improving public building energy efficiency by 75% since 1980, and also you've set a goal for achieving 65% building electrification by 2030. So my question to you, Professor, is can you tell us what China's policy strategy for achieving these goals is, and how do you support implementation?
Okay, thank you, Peter. It's my honor to be here, introduce what we done in the last 20 years in China. Actually, we start the building standards and codes research and implementation in the 1980s. So, and the building standards usually upgrade once every 10 years. So that is why today in China we have 78% energy reduction building standards, which by 30% in 1990s and 50% energy reduction in 2000 to 2005, and 65% energy reduction in 2015, and 75% energy reduction after 2020. So this is why this is how we upgrade the building energy standard codes. And starts from 2015, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development start to consider that in order to achieve the mid to long-term goal in 2050, and we need to have another mid to long-term plan of the building energy efficiency standards and together with the building carbon reduction standards. So starts from that time, our academy established a mid to long-term energy simulation and prediction model to try to see how we could meet the target set by the central government and also by the Ministry of Housing, Urban Rural Development through the upgrade of building standards, and also by create the building carbon, we call zero carbon building standards. And in 2017, during the 13th five-year plan, the Ministry of Housing have the first target to promote nearly zero energy building, which is 10 million square meters. That target is not very high compared with like 10 billion square meters in the last 5 years, but it's a very first start and very successful start. So since that, different provinces and cities have issued the incentive policy. Some have the direct funding and some have some tax reduction to real estate developers who would like to design and construct ultra low and nearly zero energy building to cover the incremental cost of this kind of building compared with the minimum requirements in the building codes. Even the target is 10 million square meters, and today we already reach 30 million square meters. So kind of successful in the very infant stage. And our plan is to try to upgrade once another upgrade the building standards in next 10 years to meet the requirements that equals to the ultra low energy building. And then after 5 years to nearly the energy building. So Peter, if your question is how we implement, so we implement this by upgrade the building codes. Also, it will together with the manufacturers, also together with the design institutes, but the building codes upgrading is the top priority.
And how about capacity building? Because if you're upgrading the codes, then does the industry receive training so they can immediately take on and achieve the new standards?
Yes, the capacity building is also one of the very important things because we have 20,000 design institutes in China, and we after we issue the building standard codes, and we have some open video that people could watch the video themselves online, and it tell people how to design an ultra low building step by step, and it could also teach people where you can find the best practices in China and where is the building you could visit, and how which manufacturer is meet a higher level certification. So all this information could be found by the online. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like the key here is that you've got a clear target, and then you've got a plan, yes, which is sort of, it sounds like systematically rolled out. And monitoring, I mean, you've got to collect a lot of data, I would imagine, to make sure that you've got compliance.
Yes, we also do some testing and monitoring of the best practices in order to prove which technology is suitable for the specific climate zone and for the specific building. Because China, we have 5 climate zones from severe cold to very hot, and the different building types. So different building types in different climate zones have different solutions. And so we track and we do continuous data collection of some best practices to showcase, to show everybody that this technology system could have energy and carbon reduction as it calculated.
Right. Okay. I'm a little frustrated because we don't have a lot of time, and just scratching the tip of the iceberg of how you design and implement building regulations in China is tantalising. So I would encourage people to catch up with Professor Zhang when we finish. But I'd like to switch now to India, which I think has surpassed China as the most populous nation on earth recently. Yes. So Millie, India's experienced remarkable demographic shift from rural to urban in the last decade or so. And we've got cities growing at an amazing rate. We have the building sector now contributing to over 20% of national emissions. The challenges in India are not just in terms of climate, but they're also socioeconomic and health related as well. And we've heard that there is a national scheme called the PMAYU, which is the National Affordable Housing Scheme, which recently agreed to construct 8 million new affordable housing dwellings in the next 2 years. But the building codes are not being implemented as fast as the buildings are going up. And this means that there's obviously pressure on resources, but there's also potentially a huge lock-in risk with just meeting the demand for housing, which I believe is around about 90% of the activity in India at the moment. So with that in mind, it's a really tough sort of set of issues to throw at you, Millie, but you've been involved in policy development and reform for more than 20 years. So how are you seeing the policy landscape in India changing to really tackle these issues at kind of speed and scale?
Okay. So it's a Herculean task for me to summarize it, because it has been a long journey, and the building sector per se is pretty kind of segregated in terms of who does what and who is responsible for implementing policies. So just to so if I have to start, so if you look at the building sector, so you can't generalize. I mean, you spoke about housing, but then you have commercial buildings, you have residential buildings. And in terms of who constructs these buildings, there would be a private sector constructing for their own operations or for somebody else to use. There would be, public sector, which is also one of the largest body that, kind of makes huge government buildings, infrastructure at state and federal level. And also the PMAY scheme, which you mentioned about, that's also driven by the Government of India, but of course it is implemented also through different private sector, actors. So now, and we still have, still say that 70% of the building stock is yet to be constructed, but also we have a huge kind of burden of existing buildings, and as we have seen from the OECD presentation, that also has a lot of lock-in of inefficiency that needs to be dealt with. So if I kind of separate it out, and in terms of energy use intensity per se, you would say commercial buildings have the higher energy use intensity, because they would be typically, air conditioned, where majority of the climate zone in India is either hot, dry, hot, humid, or composite. And you have the other chunk, which is where the energy use intensity, EUI, what we say, may not be so high, which is the residential buildings. Because typically residential buildings would not be air conditioned round the clock. It will be, demand-based AC, and also depending on the climate, and mostly, well ventilated, and homes that have ceiling fans to drive also thermal comfort in major seasons. So now if we take the entire, so now you have this basket of buildings, new, upcoming and existing, and you also have different government, and so in India the policy may get done at federal level but implemented at state level. So buildings per se are not a federal subject. So any state is also empowered to change the regulation what comes down from the central level and do it at their own level. So that makes it more complex. And again, energy per se is dealt with by Ministry of Power. Environmental issues are dealt with by Ministry of Environment and Forest, and you have Ministry of Housing that deals with construction. So when you say that you want to invite Ministry of Construction from India, there is no such ministry, So, and they are all responsible for that. So now, where does the code, so now if this is the overall landscape of how buildings get constructed, the Energy Conservation Building Code of India was first introduced, in 2007. And that was done by Ministry of Power-driven body with Bureau of Energy Efficiency. And then it had to be kind of implemented through the different state nodal agencies. So they kind of customized it, and there was several level of mandates, and it never got implemented to the extent that we want. So you have the codes, but the implementation rigor is very less. Then on the other pathway, what happened is that the Bureau of Energy Efficiency coordinated with the Ministry of Environment and Forest, and there is another regulation called environmental clearance that is given to large construction projects above 20,000 square meter. So there was an effort to integrate it there and kind of at least filter the large construction projects through the filter of, to enable the code implementation. So that's one basket. And through the state nodal agencies, again the state nodal agencies are also a combination of a body, who implements the renewable energy program plus the energy efficiency part. So this is how at the commercial building level, this is how the mechanism of code implementation. And I am not getting into the, how it is monitored. Now there are several mechanisms. I'll come to that shortly, briefly. And for the existing buildings, what is happening is, again, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has a star rating program through which the existing buildings also get certified. And complementing this entire efforts, we have different rating agencies, private-driven rating agencies within India, who also drive a lot of code implementation through private sector initiatives. So this is on the commercial building side. On the residential building side, since I mentioned that most of our buildings are, not tight buildings or not, kind of fully air conditioned round the clock. So the government initially took a different approach of addressing this sector through the appliance labeling program, which is to make the appliances which are there, the refrigerators, the air conditioners, the ceiling fans, the water heaters, to be compliant with the Energy Star labeling. So that drove a lot of efficiency within the residential sector buildings. But again, implementation remains a challenge. To also help that, government has, this master trainer programs, because capacity building remains a key challenge for this entire sector. So government has introduced the master trainer program, and there are different bodies that have been empowered to be master trainers, who go and give this training to the state local agencies, to local architects, to train them. And now, because the volumes are very large, government is trying to kind of empower, they are empaneling and empowering them to help the government to kind of go and check on site, or, kind of certify buildings to be ECBC compliant. So there is
a vertical line. It seems like with India, you've got the same vertical, but you've got different levels at which it needs to be sort of ratified. Right. So is that have I got the difference right? That there's a ratification at the top, at the national level in China, which is then sort of applied through the system of different levels of governance. Whereas in India, you've got an opportunity at each level, to change,
to oversee,
and
to change. Yes,
right.
You are the states are also empowered to make revisions and make local codes based on the code that is given by the central government.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting too, because one of the things that seems to be different in terms of the profile of the built environment in India particularly is that you've got a large informal sector, which is moving into the formal sector now. That'd be right. So that needs to be managed as well, doesn't it?
Informal sector in the sense?
Informal housing.
I'm mostly talking about, I don't know what you mean. I mean, when you say, are you meaning private sector?
No, slum areas and these sorts of things. Yeah.
Okay, so those will not be, kind of. So there are different. That's a completely different ballgame.
I know, but you've got. It's still part of the question. I mean, we hear the slum in Mumbai, for example, being privatised and so on. So it's about how you bring. It's the equity question.
That goes into the acquisition, and then there are different models around that. So there are these redevelopment schemes that come up which try to resettle these informal settlements into high-rise buildings, which has a whole lot of social issues that come in later on. And then, to be able to monetize the project adequately, they also sell a part of it. So in the same setup, you may have high-end residential and this kind. So, slum dwellers living in resettled properties. So that's a completely different, kind of and I wouldn't say that they typically would follow the energy code per se. Well, if they come under the influence or come under the ambit of the energy, the environmental clearance, which many projects do because of the size, then they have to follow it. But I have been, and so this is the paradox around it. So I have been part of the environmental clearance process for several years, and I have seen developers, they kind of split a project into two parts, and say that each project will be 19,999 square meter, and others so, and I don't come under that. So there are different ways,
Okay, very diplomatic.
So there are ways of doing it,
Yeah. Okay, we're getting the sign from the back of the room there, Oliver. Thank you so much. I will ask one last question to each of you in turn. So you've got very different approaches. We're talking about an international collaboration format. So First of all, from the point of view of China, what would you be looking for in terms of international support to really help you achieve your targets?
From my point of view, each country is very different, but the building codes and standards, as the OECD introduced, mainly cover the similar parts, like building envelopes, components, equipments, and systems. So if we could harmonize different building codes in different countries, that will be a very helpful methodology to promote the international collaboration.
Terrific. And how about you, Millie? What would you say would be the most value add for international collaboration?
Yeah, I think, historically India has got a lot of international support in pushing energy efficiency, renewable energy agenda. In fact, the energy code was also developed with support from USAID. French support came in through AFD for popularizing green housing, through financial institutions, so on and so forth. So, India is a big country, and definitely international support in capacity building, in kind of, creating more knowledge around new areas of work like embodied carbon, etc., where I guess Europe has a lot of knowledge. So in new avenues of work, definitely, it will be much welcome.
Okay, great. So there's a platform to start on. So thank you both so much. Please thank our panelists. So I turn this on.
Sorry?
Pass me that. Excellent. You can if you like, but I think I know this person. Roland? Probably needs no introduction, so.
Oh, is this a timer?
Yeah.
You went over.
No, it's okay. By one question.
So, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Thank you. And the whirlwind tour of the world, Europe, China, India. So now we'd like to turn to the private sector and discuss also what is actually happening in the private sector, and how do we work with each other and really reinforce each other. It's my great pleasure to invite 4 panelists, and we will have a quick discussion. So first of all, Robert Spencer. You work with global engineering firm AECOM, but you're also the vice chair of the Sustainable Development Committee of FIDIC, the International Engineering Association. Thank you for joining me. Gaëtan Siu. You're ambassador to COP for the International Union of Architects, I guess. Yes. This must be the French acronym. Almost fell over it. Sunita Purushottam, you're the head of sustainability for Mahindra Life Spaces, a large developer in India, and wonderful to speak again about India from a private sector perspective. And we don't have Emmanuel Normant, but we do have Pascal Eveillard, who is with Saint-Gobain and leading Saint-Gobain's practice on decarbonization, circularity, etc. So thank you very much. Myself, I'm Roland. I'm the Director Built Environment at the WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So thank you for being around me. That's wonderful. Following a panel speaking more about public policy, we also want to move to discuss private sector actions. The message is the key organizations in built environment along the value chain are mobilized as well. There is a lot of action happening. However, we also need to work really together to transform the sector. And the forum in March will be a big milestone for all of us. As we discussed earlier, the built environment is 40% of global energy-related CO2 emissions. We talk a lot about the energy emissions. Built environment consumes 50% of global electricity, large part of global energy overall. That needs to be reduced in terms of consumption, but also decarbonized. But we should not forget the other part of embodied carbon, which in new build typically already can be 50% of the total life cycle emissions. So this is a massive challenge, and the private sector is currently coming together under an initiative that we call market transformation. How do we, along the value chain, work much more closely together so that we decarbonize? And we know that there are barriers in the way we contract, in the way we develop projects, in the way we procure. And we need to overcome those barriers. And that is currently a subject of discussion. How can all companies really work much more closely together and overcome these? And with the Global Alliance, 2 years ago, we developed this foundational work on the market transformation levers. We need to look at all the emissions, all carbon emissions that happen in buildings, so call it whole life carbon. We can translate that to infrastructure. We also need to understand all the emissions and how do we measure that for a kilometer of road or whatever it be. And then we need to put that carbon next to cost, which we don't do today. We don't build without knowing the cost, but we still build without knowing the carbon. And ultimately, how do we incentivize reductions through procurement, through regulation, through market commitments, etc. So we'd like to briefly discuss this now. I have 3 questions to all of you, but I will ask the 2 first ones together because we will only have like 2 rounds. We have about 21 minutes left. So I'll ask you to maybe be 3-4 minutes in your first statement if possible, and then we have time for 1 follow-up. So thank you very much for being with me and sticking to time. The 3 questions are, how do you as an individual organization contribute to the market transformation? And what needs to happen collectively? So you're also part of maybe an industry association, so how do we work collectively? And the 3rd question will be, what do you bring to the forum? What is the commitment or key message that you bring to the Global Forum in March? So, as I said, I'll group the first one together as a company or organization and collectively with your industry. How do you contribute to market transformation? Maybe we just go the way it's on the slide from left to right. Robert, I have you first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll give a twin perspective then, Roland, in response. So I'm here representing 2 organizations. My day job is as the Global Sustainability Advisor for AECOM, a major infrastructure advisory consultancy. And I'm also on the FIDIC Sustainable Development Committee, as Roland said. So I'll come to the institutional piece around FIDIC in a minute, but just to give a sense of how a large engineering and design consultancy in the architecture and engineering space, AECOM, is responding. I'll give you a very quick summary of some of the initiatives that we have in place at the corporate level. So about 3.5 years ago, nearly 4 years ago, we developed our ESG strategy, our sustainability strategy, which we call Sustainable Legacies. This is an all-encompassing strategy across our markets and regions. Just to give you a sense of the scale of AECOM, we're about 51,000 people headquartered in the United States of America. About half of that workforce is in the Americas, and the rest of the workforce is spread across Europe, India, the Middle East, Asia, and Australia and New Zealand. Within that organization, probably 15,000 to 20,000 of those individuals are engineering designers, structural engineers, mechanical, electrical engineers, civil engineers, and so on. And they're probably working on around 15,000 to 20,000 projects a year. So there's a lot of scope for impact, and we take that responsibility very seriously. One of the first things that we implemented as part of our ESG strategy, which we call Sustainable Legacies, was developing an approach around decarbonizing our designs. So if you consider that we're one of the leading sustainability companies in our field, we're aligned with the Science Based Targets initiative, we're tracking and reducing our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, that's all well and good. But our designed emissions, the emissions that we, if you like, are, I wouldn't say responsible for, but we're responding to the client's demand for an infrastructure or a building asset to be created. Therefore, we have an influence over the scale of those emissions, right? So we call that Scope X within the business, just because we wanted a word for it and it wasn't covered in the original GHG protocol, okay? Other institutions are calling those like serviced emissions. Now, I was on a very good conversation last night with the Race to Zero team talking about an industry-wide approach to serviced emissions. So let's call them serviced emissions. They're of a much bigger scale than our Scope 1, 2 and 3. If you imagine our Scope 1, 2 and 3 being, say, a couple of 100,000 tonnes a year, that's reducing very rapidly. I think we're actually quite closer to 100,000 now. Then the designed emissions, in other words, the emissions that we touch as a result of designing for our clients, could be 60, 80 times larger than that. So that's the handprint, if you like, of the work of an organisation like us, as opposed to the footprint, which is the Scope 1, 2, 3. So our Scope X initiative is designed around how do we train more and more people within the engineering sector to become familiar with carbon coefficients and carbon modelling. And so that's involving retraining a large cadre of civil, structural, other types of engineers who may not have had that schooling when they went through university and their master's degrees, to become much more familiar with carbon coefficients and how to integrate carbon into their design processes. And of course, we're not just giving them a few days training and saying, go off and you're carbon experts now. There are a whole bunch of tools and dashboards and training guides that help that workforce get to grips with understanding how to integrate carbon into their normal workflows. And alongside that, we've made a commitment that we want to, as an aspiration, pull out about 50% of the carbon of our design processes on large infrastructure projects. Our feeling is that if we can understand how to do that with large highways projects and work with water use. So I should have mentioned the sectors that we're involved in. Transportation is our biggest sector that we're involved in, working for a lot of departments for transportation and ministries for transportation in various countries around the world, but then also working for the major water and energy utilities and local authorities and local governments in the built environment. So how do we look at those projects and do three things really? One, create a library of best case studies where we've been able to change materials, change the structural design process, and have that as a, if you like, it's part of our ACOM University platform, a whole cohort of resources that our engineers can use to then think, okay, well, I'm designing a railway bridge. These guys over here did this structural shift and they were able to reduce the carbon by 20%. Let's do that on all our other 10 projects that our team's working on. That sort of scaling and implementation, I think, can have a very big impact and follow through on the building's breakthrough ambition. We've also then got the tools and the aggregation. I mean, my ambition for Scope X is in a few years' time, if someone asked ACOM, how many thousands of tons have you decarbonised all your designs across all your portfolios for all your clients over the last year, I'll be able to have an answer. At the moment, that's impossible. All those data sets and all that carbon data aggregated across all our projects. But I think it's not years away. It's hopefully a year or 2
years? 2 years away?
I'm thinking 1 or 2. In order, because we've got the tools and the platforms, it's now a question of having enough scaling across the projects that everyone knows how to log the data and calculate the emissions. So I'll stop there.
But it's fascinating. I mean, touching 10,000 projects a year on a daily basis, that is indeed massive scale. And just the language of, we influence, is it our... Now, maybe turning to you, Gaëtan, you sit even a little earlier somewhat in the decision-making process, because you do the original design and you think about how something will be done. So, come at this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roland, and thank you, Robert. I think coming from your background, and from our side, we speak on non-measurable data, which is more delicate and more difficult for us. When you speak of value chain, for example, you speak of the circular economy and you speak of everything that is measurable all along the chain. Maybe for us, it's a chain of human values, human activities, which we have to turn into real aspects that will become become measurable in terms of emission, etc. To speak like an architect, you know, we are, like you said earlier, Roland, we are the first one to think of your kids, to educate them. We build a school where they're going to be educated. Then we build a house where you're going to live. We build the office where you're going to work. We build the airport where you're going to take your holiday and the hotel where you arrive, etc. So all these are human activities which are very difficult to measure, but especially when you think of which is and the cultural diversity, both in terms of cultural, in terms of geography, it's very, very different, and we have to sort of have a measure funding, to be able to measure projects that needs to be funded properly with what we call the seem to be the most important one, the social one. And this is where it's difficult to measure. This is where it's difficult for us to really measure everything. When you go to the continent of Africa, they say, well, the environment, we haven't done really wrong because we haven't done much. But the social, there's everything to be done, and this is where we need. So how do we measure all this? So to cut it, the long story short, I think we have to find in our discussion when we do meet in Paris the common trend, the new universal language that could cut across geographies, cultures, and also technology, and all these measurable things. Just to end, I would like to say one thing which for us is very, very important. We tend to prefer to be sustainable by design rather sustainable by technology, more universal. And this would help a lot in the thinking. And you said also, what would we contribute to the market transformation in terms of 3 million architects around the world? This is what we represent. We are hoping that 10% of this crowd, 300,000, should be properly educated to the right everyday gesture in their practice so that the rest of the world can be happy with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gaëtan. You did scare me a little bit at the beginning when you said it's difficult to measure. I do hope you measure things, and I know you do. But I really like the universal language. So how do we speak on the environment, social issues, and how to bring that into the project? And you're really at the start of that. So maybe turning to you, Sunita, in some ways you're even before that in the...
So mechanical, electrical, plumbing consultants, if we have to get to net zero, are they aligned? Are the construction contractors, are they aligned? Are the, the facility management company, are they aligned? Are the material manufacturers, are they aligned? And therefore we have worked with WRI, AEEE and EcoCollab to basically form the Decarbonization Business Charter. It was initially funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and now it's funded by Swiss Development Corporation. And that's the platform that we have created in India. It has about 65 different stakeholders, developers, architectural firms, consultants, because what we realized is...
Our processes, we are an energy intensive company. All our products are... We have energy efficiency solutions, so we are mainly dealing with the building envelope, so energy efficiency for us is a priority. It was reminded before by the representative of the European Union that we shall put energy efficiency first in our buildings. So we have solutions to reduce energy consumption, but we have also more and more low carbon solutions to reduce the embodied carbon of buildings. Again, it's twofold. We have clearly the approach to promote lightweight construction, so to have less materials embarked into constructions, thus limiting and reducing the embodied carbon. But we are also, thanks to our improvement in our footprint, we are also delivering solutions with more and more reduced carbon footprints. Just to give two examples, we have been able to fully electrify one plasterboard plant in Norway, thus reducing significantly the carbon footprint for plasterboards in this country. So it's about 1 kilogram per square meter, which is a reduction by 40% compared to what is the average on the market. And in France, we have been able to produce, to have a zero carbon production for flat glass. So flat glass could be produced at zero carbon, it's Scope 1 and 2. And, but it was only for a trial to demonstrate that it is feasible. Still, we have launched an offer, which is with the glass, with the high recycled content and a 40% reduced carbon footprint. So just to say that we are able to deliver solutions to reduce carbon footprint of buildings. Next to that, so having solutions, having technology is good, but it's not enough, definitely. So we see that it's key and crucial to engage with the entire value chain. That's why we have also launched an initiative this year, which is called the Saint-Gobain Sustainable Construction Observatory. And in this observatory, we want to engage further with different stakeholders. We have a barometer, and in this barometer, to measure what people believe is important, what levers need to be activated to move further in sustainable construction, we have seen that first, there is a lack of knowledge on the market. So clearly, we need to be much more engaged in delivering information. We may have solutions. They may be known by large engineering companies, by large architecture firms, but many people on the market don't know those solutions. My experience is that a product is still new after 10 years on the market, so it takes time to be. We are not in the consumer good industry, definitely not. So it takes time for innovations to diffuse into the market. Second learning we got through this barometer, there is a real expectation in the value chain to have cooperation, to exchange experience, to have more knowledge sharing between the different stakeholders. So this is something where we need to contribute. And there is also a huge expectation for common language, and this is what was already said. So common language meaning common definitions, common standards, common way of measuring, and common tools to work together. Not necessarily to have exactly the same pathway everywhere, but at least to support different pathways in a consistent way. And this is also something that is very much expected. And just to finish, so in Saint-Gobain we have a real conviction that we need to work all together along the value chain. So that's why we were founding members of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction in 2015 in Paris. So this was already a strong conviction for us. We are in WBCSD, we are in the World Green Building Council, so all kinds of groups of stakeholders that prove to be efficient, but we need to go further and we need to go beyond those established groups of stakeholders. And that's why we are so supportive of this new initiative with the forum.
Thank you, and we need all the support from everyone and many, many more. We're unfortunately up in time, but if you allow me to just indulge in a few more minutes to ask each one of you to at least in a closing statement what you will bring to the forum. Yeah, just very briefly. Is there another session now starting? Yeah, so just very briefly, what do you bring to the forum? What is your key message that you want to bring to the forum? Maybe we start from you, Pascal, and just come over here.
We bring our conviction that it is key. We will bring our motivation to elaborate further all together. So clearly, strong motivation to move and all the power of Saint-Gobain to embrace. We are in 70 countries, so we will try to bring all our colleagues in each and every country into the game.
Thank you. Gaëtan?
I would say this almost the same thing. We are in 100 countries plus. And we will bring the academy, the practice, the organization, global organization, the industry and the government into one transversal, universal, between commas, language and standards that help the whole industry and the whole value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
Well, with my FIDIC hat on, right behind the buildings, breakthrough, really supporting that. And I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned so much is that nature's a big part of achieving lower emission buildings, better environment for people to live and work in. And I just want to let people know about the Nature Positive Infrastructure Playbook, which we developed over the last year at FIDIC with WWF. ACOM was the technical author for that. And that provides a great synopsis of benefits and solutions by infrastructure sector for how to integrate nature into infrastructure design. It's not for the ecologists, it's designed for the engineering practice to understand those concepts and build them in. That will have many co-benefits beyond carbon and biodiversity.
Many best practice examples bringing to the forum. Yeah. And Sunita?
Transparency and sharing. We would love to share with everybody and provide place for pilots and learn more.
Thank you very much to my panelists. And with that, yeah, let's see each other in Paris. We come with a lot of energy. And of course, as WBCSD, we're also fully supportive. We'll be there. Yves Laurent, any final words? Or I'm sorry, we went over by just a few minutes. So just...
Thank you.